Development Cooperation Survey Study toward effective development cooperation in the COVID-19 period. Many of you know that the DCF survey has provided evidence on the state of play in the effectiveness of development cooperation since 2008. The importance of such evidence in the context of COVID-19 crisis has become even more important for the purpose of planning and decision making. We all know developing countries now face dual challenges: address the new risks posed by COVID-19 and advance the fight against existing vulnerabilities, which have been exacerbated by the pandemic, all within their limited resources. So it's a very big challenge for developing countries in the current context. We really want to get today from this conversation the collective thinking of the DCF network. How can we bolster the weakest capacities and least resources in developing countries moving into the decade of action for the SDGs? And let me frame the discussion by posing 3 questions. And then I'll invite Ms. Angela Bester to give an overview of the study. First and foremost, which has become a stark reality now, how can we ensure that international development cooperation is risk-informed and climate-smart? COVID-19 has driven this point home very strongly that we have to manage risks and anticipate them. The climate crisis exposed the complexity and interconnectedness of risk, and COVID-19 has put such challenges front and center. What are the approaches, tools, and sectors that countries and their partners are prioritizing to reduce risk and build resilience? The 2020 DCF Survey Study makes a clear case for investing in developing countries' capacities and national systems. The second question is, what are some key accelerators that could be used more widely to enhance quality and impact of development cooperation? Some recent positive developments have been innovations in policy at local and regional government levels, stronger drive for engagement by parliamentarians, civil society and the private sector, and of course, philanthropy. Some of these aspects are highlighted in the study. Third, how can we improve the links between the lessons learned from development cooperation experiences and the necessary changes in policy and behavior by countries and their partners and stakeholders? As you all know, it's about behavior modification and policy innovation. And we want the DCF survey's lessons to be deployed in modifying behavior on all sides of development cooperation. We also understand that the enhanced national capacities for financing, planning, and delivery are also critical and can be an effective vehicle for change. And I want to mention here the ongoing work on integrated national financing frameworks, which are designed to help countries to have a full picture of their financial flows, both in terms of what is coming in, what is generated domestically, and also assess their needs and then have a financing strategy to meet those needs. And we think the SDGs top the list when it comes to targeting financing strategy or investing in the SDGs. And we believe that the DCF network can share their knowledge and expertise in developing INFFs as a more effective tool in support of national efforts to finance their sustainable development strategies. So these are the 3 key questions I wanted to put in front of the panelists, the lead discussants, and to all of you to think while this conversation goes on. Few rules for housekeeping. All general attendees are on mute to ensure good sound quality. Panelists have microphone access and should kindly mute themselves when not speaking. I encourage participants to submit questions in writing at any time during the presentations. These will be collected by the DCF team and then introduced during the interactive period. To submit a question, simply go to the Q&A box, select all panelists, and write and send your question. We might not get to all of them, but they will all be captured in our summary. And I want to share with all of you that a video recording of the meeting will be available on the website after the meeting. So now let me begin with our first presenter and the only presenter, Ms. Angela Bester. She will present the key findings and proposals from the DCF 2020 DCF Survey Study. Ms. Bester is an independent consultant who has conducted evaluations and reviews for UN agencies, and she has analyzed and reported on 4 of the 6 DCF surveys. Angela, over to you.
Thank you very much, Naveed, for setting the stage for today's discussion. And thank you to those of you who are joining us today. My task is to share with you the key findings and the proposals for action from the 2020 DCF survey. And I'm hoping that it will be displaying shortly. I do not see it on my screen as yet.
Here you go. It's not there.
Okay. So this is the 6th DCF survey that has been conducted. And for those of you who are familiar with the DCF surveys, it's structured around 4 enablers, namely national development cooperation policies, country results frameworks, development cooperation information systems, and national development cooperation forums with capacity support as cross-cutting. Now, bear in mind that this survey, it's a snapshot of these enablers at a particular point in time. And I've been through 4 of the 6 surveys, and over time, we have seen that the country context change, and also the countries who participate also change. So we always have to bear that in mind when we interpret the results. But for the 2019-2020 survey, we had 55 countries participating, and that represents about 45% of those who were invited. So that is quite a good response. And of those, 36 reported that they had policies in place, as you can see on the slide, 29 with results frameworks or something similar, 40 with development cooperation information systems, and 37 had a forum of some sorts where the results of, not simply the results, but various issues in relation to development cooperation are discussed at least on an annual basis. And it's very important to note that these are in most countries chaired by senior levels of government. Next slide, please. Just to add that the countries that participated came from all regions and covered all income groups as well. We had a very good spread of countries and a good representation from the Latin American Caribbean region that showed quite an increase. That said, as Naveed mentioned in his introductory remarks, COVID-19 is a very important part of the context Now, the the survey was launched prior to COVID-19, but we used the opportunity of engaging 10 participating countries to get their views on various enablers, but also on the impact of COVID-19 and what is emerging. And bear in mind, these are only 10 countries, that there is quite a lot of uncertainty about, will there be sufficient resources? There are competing priorities. A lot of resources are being channeled to, understandably, to strengthening health systems, but there are also other important areas in need of assistance. What was encouraging was that countries we interviewed are using their enablers to respond to COVID-19. For example, they're using the National Development Cooperation Forum to leverage partnerships with the private sector. That's an example. And it was interesting to hear a couple of countries talking about how they have modified their development cooperation information systems to enable them to track COVID-19 related expenditures. So I have no doubt that these enablers will become increasingly important down the line as countries respond to COVID-19 and the longer term recovery. Next slide, please. On the national, looking at the trends for each of the enablers for national development cooperation policies. I mean, the one thing that has become very clear over the past 3 surveys, at least, is that NDCPs, they certainly are part of the architecture, the international development cooperation ecosystem. And 66% of countries in the survey had developed NDCPs, and in fact, most of these had been adopted since the 2030 agenda. So they are relatively new. Very importantly, they cover increasingly diverse sources of finance and means of implementation. And as you can see on the graph, there's a great emphasis on domestic resource mobilization. How that shifts with COVID-19 is another issue. South-South cooperation and technical cooperation, and also private finance. So the NDCPs are covered, going well beyond the traditional ODA. What we did find in reviewing copies of the NDCPs, we found that very few of them covered disaster risk reduction and preparedness. And those who did were often, they were countries who had a history of climate-related disasters. But other countries generally do not cover disasters. And this is perhaps something that COVID-19 response will require. The involvement of parliaments, it varies from country to country. It depends on the system of government in place. We found that although a number of countries indicated that they consulted parliaments in the development of the NDCPs, we find that they're not necessarily to report on progress with implementation of policies. So that's just something we've picked up in prior surveys as well. Country results frameworks. Oh, sorry, before I go to, let me just indicate that in the report, for each enabler, we've identified a set of practical proposals for action that countries may wish to consider. And just for the presentation, just highlighting a few of these. There are a number of countries who don't have a standalone NDCPs. It's part of a national sustainable development document. And we found in our assessment that it would be, those documents, they don't provide sufficient detail. So it would be useful if countries developed standalone policy documents. The review of policies, I mean, that is quite important. We found that several countries did not conduct regular reviews, and it's just good practice for policy to have regular comprehensive reviews of the policies, and maybe every 3 to 5 years. And also if there are changes in the global context. Any new policies, we think it would be useful to incorporate assessment of risks to sustainable development and how international partners can support building resilience. Again, this is with COVID-19 building back better in mind. On country results frameworks, we saw that there are some improvements with regard to country results frameworks, although the number of countries who had specific results frameworks was somewhat lower for this survey than in previous surveys. And we tried to analyze why this was the case. A number of countries prefer to use their national sustainable development, the framework they use for monitoring, rather than have a specific country results framework for development cooperation. But we found some progress. For example, local and regional governments. Previous surveys found few countries had targets for these. Whereas for the 2020 survey, we found that at least, I think about 59% of countries indicated that they have managed to set targets for local and regional governments. And this is important in the context of the SDGs. We know that these levels of government play an important role in implementation of the agenda. Monitoring of targets. Countries do see value in monitoring targets. They see that the monitoring helps to improve alignment with national priorities. And the graph there simply gives you an indication of the improvement over the previous survey. So, only 8% of countries said that there's minimal or no improvement. So it's quite a good result. What we did note is that there does appear to be some backsliding in reducing the use of parallel results frameworks. About 36% of only 36% of countries reported that they used the same or overlapping results frameworks with their development partners. So this is something. It might simply be an aberration for this survey, but it's something to keep track of in the next survey. So practical proposals for action for improving country results frameworks. We do suggest that those who don't have frameworks should be encouraged to develop specific frameworks so that they can monitor results of development cooperation. And also, again, urging alignment by international development cooperation partners to align their frameworks with country frameworks so that parallel frameworks are avoided. And we also propose that there should be continued capacity support in using results-based approaches to development cooperation. And also then developing countries should invest in strengthening their capacities to secure targets for agreed targets for international partners. As we found that in a number of countries, setting of targets is still somewhat a challenge, particularly where development cooperation responsibilities are split between ministries. It's always an issue of who is negotiating the targets. So those are just some of the proposals around country results frameworks. Development, the next enabler is the Development Cooperation Information System, or DCIS. Here we found that there were many positive things that came from the survey. Most countries, in fact, do have these systems in place and are using them to track disbursements, project progress, and so on. They could make better use for budgeting and planning. But of course, that depends on the quality of information that is available on the system. And that it still is one of the challenges that a number of countries expressed around the quality of data. On the positive side, the system is, countries are making their systems accessible to a wide range of stakeholders. But still, what we find that the regular users are still mainly government and the international development cooperation partners. It's very low usage from non-state actors, we found. An improvement as parliaments, as regular users, and that is very encouraging. But we do feel that there is scope to encourage regular use of the DCIS by non-state actors. And that would then require very good information so that people have confidence in the information. We still find that there is a heavy reliance on data from international partners. And in fact, the survey, the countries surveyed relied more on their international partners for data, as opposed to data from their line ministries. So there's certainly a need to strengthen national data. So some of the proposals that we have suggested, they should be, national governments should look at...
And now we have to wind up, so if you could get...
Yes, okay.
Sorry.
So, okay, there are a number of proposals there around improving the DCIS. So let's just move to the next slide. In terms of the NDCFs, again, we've seen positive shifts, but one of the issues there is limited engagement of non-state actors such as civil society and the private sector, and also limited participation of parliaments. And in the proposals, we have suggested that countries look at ways of engaging the non-state actors in their NDCFs. We can proceed to the next slide, Sans. So there again, a number of proposals. Capacity support continues to be important. And although a number of countries have received support, there's certainly a demand for support, especially around the DCIS and monitoring and evaluation. And we can expect the demand for capacity support to increase in the COVID-19 period. again, just pointing to limited capacity support for certain sectors such as parliaments, national NGOs, and local and regional governments. So the next slide, please. Again, just to emphasize that capacity support is going to be very important going forward. And we have some suggestions in the report around support for reviewing NDCPs to be risk-informed and client-smart, and also supporting countries to develop comprehensive assessments, and again, using NDCFs to improve the quality of dialogue and partnerships with stakeholders, all in support of COVID-19 response and recovery efforts. And then just finally, to indicate that the DCF survey, where the feedback we have received from countries is that they find it, you can go to the last slide, that they find it a very useful tool for learning. And in the report, we just outline how countries, what they have gained from it, particularly promoting frank dialogue, also improving coordination, mutual learning, and very importantly, enhancing transparency in development cooperation. So that is just a snapshot of the 2020 DCF Survey Study. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendla, for an excellent study and very good presentation. And I really like the way you have identified areas for action. These are the steps that can improve development cooperation, and it also becomes very clear. It's not a linear curve. You see few areas improve and few recede. So we need to build momentum. Let me invite our distinguished panelists. We have 3 panelists, and I want to begin by brief introductions. We have Mrs. Gladys Mante Ustabute. And Gladys, forgive me if I did not pronounce her last name correctly. I'm getting used to it, it's new. She is Chief Economic Officer, Head of UN System Unit, Ministry of Finance, Ghana. We have Mr. Riazul Basha Siddiq, Joint Secretary, Economic Relations Division, Ministry of Finance of Bangladesh. And Mr. Carlos Paul, Director, Ministry of Economic Development and Petroleum, Belize. Our first panelist will be Gladys. She will speak for 5 to 7 minutes. I have 2 questions for you, Gladys. How have the enablers of development cooperation supported short-term and long-term planning for recovery from the pandemic? Because now they say it's BC and AC, before COVID and the world after COVID. So how are you deploying the enablers to recover better from the pandemic? And to this end, have new national initiatives emerged towards enhancing the impact of development cooperation? Gladys, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon from Accra. I know, Navid, you are forgiven for not practicing well on my new name. We will have a chat about this when I come to New York or when you come to Ghana.
For all of us right now, please pronounce it so everyone knows.
Yes, it's Osabuti.
Osabuti.
Or Osabuti. Angela, we will talk about this behind the scenes. Okay. But I'm happy to join you this afternoon from Accra. Colleagues, you will all agree with me that the COVID-19 pandemic has taken all of us unawares. When we did our budget and ended it December last year, and we started with implementation in January, we did not think about COVID-19. We did not even know about it. So it took all of us unaware, and quickly we had to adjust to be able to do things, one, to contain the pandemic, and also to be able, from Ministry of Finance, to be able to spend within budget, which was almost impossible. But I'm happy to say that the enablers of the development cooperation arena has really helped us. And I would want to, for the sake of time, I would want to talk about 2 or 3. The development cooperation policy is the number one that has helped in this initiative. And I must also add that even though the question is about short-term and long-term, David, you agree with me, we haven't done much long-term planning in this situation. You know, our figures keep changing, and so we will say for now that we are doing very well with the short-term planning to make sure that our children are back to school, the medical front is well taken care of, and all the other things. So the development cooperation policy has done us a lot of good. And I would want to mention a few items in it that has actually helped specifically. You know, there's this policy about the first thing is the policy coherence part of the development cooperation policy, which allows, there's a policy that allows for rescheduling of aid and rescheduling of inflows to be channeled towards different prioritization and when it comes to, when there are situations changing. And that's exactly what happened. As soon as COVID showed its ugly head, we contacted our development partners and we said, look, we have agreement with you. Even though we have programmed your funds to be used for ABCD, now this is what we have on hand and we all need your support. And quickly, all the facilities, technical assistance facilities, funds were able to be rescheduled so that we will be able to do the PPEs and to help the medical front people and to help our schools and government itself, because we were all overwhelmed by the nature. So that is one of the enablers. Under the same development cooperation policy, we also have the issue of partnerships. And we quickly triggered the partnership issues, both with our international partners and domestic partners. Because as we know, no one actor can do it all, even in normal circumstances with the 2030 agenda, let alone this, seriously negative impacted pandemic. And so the partnerships agreement under the development cooperation policy that enabled also helped us. And the private sector was up to the task, CSOs were up to the task. And that's how we were able to initially deal with it. The issue of division of labor is also an aspect of our development cooperation policy. And then quickly, so we tasked agencies, our partners, to stay in the lane of their comparative advantages. So you have UNICEF, instead of doing schools and hospitals and so we asked them to concentrate on the health sector. UNFPA was looking at the issues of population and domestic violence and issues. And then we have UNESCO concentrating. So the enablers really, through the development cooperation policy, really helped us. I also want to talk about the division of labor as with the UN agencies, since we are talking under UN umbrella. You know, we have been talking about delivery as one. But when COVID showed its head, now the agencies more than ever were able to put together. Maybe it is because of the way it started. I'm sure most of you know that in Ghana, the first two cases that were recorded were all UN related. One was a UNDP official who went to Norway and brought it, and then the Turkey and the other thing. So quickly the agencies came together and they were able to put everything together, their resources together, one work plan. And as we are speaking, even the PEF, the Pandemic Emergency Fund that they've gotten from World Bank, 3.3 million, we are working together with them. And then that is one of the initiatives I would say that is an initiative that has come up. In Ghana, we haven't heard about the World Bank giving UN agencies money. This is the first time. And so they have actually formed a technical team with government, and we have all sat down. We have defined the priority areas, and that is what we are going to implement. Immediately after this meeting, we're having a meeting with the finance ministry to finalize how we are going to use this. So you can see that the enablers has really, really, really helped us. Country resource framework, quickly, as Angela said, we do not have a specific development partners country resource framework. We have our national one under the supervision of the National Development Planning Commission. And that is what is being used to implement and monitor all the initiatives in this COVID era in the short term. So everything we set to do, the National Development Planning Commission is monitoring it. We are monitoring its implementation and monitoring also its effect. When there's the need to change, we quickly advise. And so we are working, the NDPC is working closely with the COVID team and advising the government. The Development Cooperation Information System, quickly to the end, we are using it basically as a chief enabler to help us record and attract the inflows. And once we have the inflows and it's all agencies under in this system, then we are able to monitor how fast they are being implemented, how fast they are releasing the monies, and also making sure that the funds actually go to the areas that we said. So Navid, quickly, these are the 3 enablers under the Development Cooperation arena or ecosystem that has helped us to deal with this COVID-19. And I must say that I believe when we sit down to take stock, we realize that they've really helped the cause, and we are doing fine with it. Thank you very much. I hope I haven't overgone my minutes.
No, Gladys, excellent timing. I must commend you.
So thank you very much.
Ghana has been a pioneer when it comes to using the enablers for effective development cooperation. So congratulations. These work for you even in this time of crisis. Yes. The pandemic hit us with big surprise, but I'm glad that you were able to put these enablers into operation quickly. And you're right, while you are responding, you don't think about the long term, but we are appealing to all countries, lay the foundation for recovery while you're responding to the pandemic.
Okay.
That's critical.
We surely will. Nabi, do you remember that, last 2-3 weeks, we braved out to send our final year students to school. Yeah. And I'm sure you are monitoring what is happening. Some schools are having reported cases, and parents are on our necks. They want to meet us. Are you also aware that the Ministry of Finance has been closed down because of the upsurge of, suddenly we don't know where it started from, and we started recording cases. So the Ministry of Finance, as we speak now, has been shut down. It has not been open. So in situations like this, even though we have our eye on the long-term planning, we want to contain the short-term and the medium term and make sure that we are fine. Our children are back home safe, and then we can think about what to do with the rest. So don't worry, we will do it.
I agree. We have to fight the fire first. I agree.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much.
Excellent presentation. Let me now move on to our next panelist. And Gladys has given us a very nice segue. Mr. Razaul Bashir Siddiq. I have 2 questions for you, sir. How can the enablers of development cooperation support LDC's pursuit of country-owned priorities and reflect emerging realities brought on by the pandemic? LDCs have very specific challenges, and you are on your way to graduation. So share with us your thoughts, and how are these linked to capacity needs? How are you dealing with your challenges of capacity building and the lack of capacity in dealing with the pandemic and laying the foundation for long-term sustainable development? Over to you. Mr. Razaul Bashir Siddiq, please unmute yourself. Go ahead. Please.
Okay, now it's.
We can hear you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, moderator. Pleasure for me to be able to join you today.
Could you please speak closer to the microphone? Your voice is fading. Thank you.
Pleasure for me to be able to join you today. I would like to raise my sympathy for inviting Bangladesh.
Could you please speak a bit louder? Thank you.
At this virtual August gathering to share our experience and learn substantive insights from our. Since 2008, DCF Survey has been providing evidence of the state of play and effectiveness of development cooperation. Bangladesh has been
Mr. Mitchell, please speak closer to the microphone. We can't hear you clearly. Thank you.
DCF Survey promotes effective dialogue and development cooperation, mutual learning.
Sorry, we cannot hear you. Please speak closer to the microphone. Go ahead.
Hi, sir.
Mr. Razal Bashar, please. I think while we fix the connection with him, let me move to the next speaker. And he can, Mr. Bashar, we are moving to the next speaker. You can sign off and sign in again, so that will give you better connection. Our next panelist from Belize, Mr. Carlos Paul. 2 questions. I just want you to share with us of the enablers support risk-informed and climate-smart approaches to development cooperation throughout recovery efforts. How have you used the enablers to manage this risk and do climate-smart recovery, which lays the foundation for long-term development also? Over to you, Mr. Paul.
Good morning from Belize. It's an honor for me to be invited to participate on the launch of this DCF 2020. As I indicated to the consultants, in Belize, we don't have a national development cooperation policy per se. However, we have been we have spelled out the country's vision, priorities, and activities related to international development cooperation on our long-term framework, which is the Horizon 2030, and on our medium-term strategy, which is the Growth and Sustainable Development Strategy, GSDS, for a time frame of 2016 to 2020. So those 2 documents, along with a public sector investment program document, lays out the development cooperation partnership that we have with our international community. These documents inform or are aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals and and informs the annual budget for the government. So my position, or Belize's position, is that we would prefer to, although we have been making progress, we have very good partnership with our international community. I think if we were to have a written, clear policy, that would help us to be more focused and be more engaged with our international partners. Some of the enablers, it has really helped us. The first one being the cooperation policy, but framework, because we also have a framework similar to what Ghana has, but at the country level, we don't have the framework that we have at the country level. It's part of the monitoring and evaluation framework that we have adopted from the UN, and that we are using to monitor and report the targets and indicator of our medium-term strategy, which is the GSDS. So I would love to get some advice, some guidance as to, okay, assist country in putting a concrete policy per se to be able to focus on that area. The aspects of disaster and climate resilience. Goal number 3 of the GSDS make reference to sustain and improve health of natural, environment, historical, and cultural assets. So we can clearly see that the goal of this GCS is to continue build capacity to engage in sustainable development. And this includes improvement of management and monitoring of key environmental areas. It also includes urban and rural planning, and it includes disaster risk management and climate resilience. And on the GSDS, we have 4 strategic action that clearly spell out in what direction we should be moving for disaster risk management and climate resilience. And I will briefly touch on them. One was to officially establish a national climate change office and strengthen its capacity to implement its mission. We did that in 2016. Review review the utility of developing a comprehensive disaster management. We have also been able to develop that management plan. Continue mainstreaming climate change consideration into national development planning. We have already done that through the implementation of various World Bank projects and European Union projects and the Green Climate Fund as well. So we have done, in Belize, we have done quite a bit with regards to those strategic actions. And one of the last of strategic action was to implement a national climate resilience investment plan. This was a plan we put together with the World Bank and that we have been successful implementing for the past 3 to 4 years. So we can clearly see that although we lack a policy, the strategic action, the strategies are taking us to that way in which we are considering the various sectors of society having to do with optimal national income, social cohesion and resilience, looking at the aspects of the environment, which has to do with what I just talked about, these strategic actions. We also have citizen security and governance. Those are the pillars, those are the main goals that is clearly spelled out on both our medium-term and our long-term framework. So that is with regards to the policy. Now with regards to the information system, the Development Cooperation Information System, the public sector investment programs that we are currently working on is comprised of projects that are being undertaken on or on behalf of the government of Belize with a view to achieve the country's national development objectives. And this includes projects financed by government and international financial institutions. And those are clearly spelled out on the annual budget on Capital 2 and Capital 3, which includes international funding for the many projects that we have. The PSIP captures useful information of government and non-government entities, ranging from the Ministry of Finance to the Central Bank of Belize, and even the IMF. When the International Monetary Fund visit Belize for the Article 4 consultation, one of the first documents that they ask is where we are with the public sector investment program, where we are with ongoing projects, where we are with projected projects. So we can see the benefit of this PSIP that lists the projects, that provides quarterly updates to both government and the community, because once we provide it to the Prime Minister and Cabinet, then it's a document that is made public, and we upload it to the government press office webpage. So the document is available, but there's a need. IMF use it, Central Bank use it for projection forecasting, Statistical Institute of Belize also use it for estimating national consumption. So this framework has been in place, it's been used. Yes, we can improve it because we are currently using a manual system up to this year, but from 2 years ago, we have been designing a management information system with the financial assistance of the CARICOM Development Fund. They have given us a grant, and we are currently working on a web-based system, which is divided into modules that capture information of the PSIP at the various levels. The system will help us to capture identification, which at the moment we have not been able to fully participate on identification of projects. PSIP has been more at when the project has been signed and has been implemented, but we want to play a role. Economic development, the Ministry of Planning wants to play a role in the planning aspect. Before a project is identified at the identification level, we want to be part. So we want this system to help us with identifying, formulating a project, planning a project, and then executing. And with the execution, we have a module of reporting. We will be able to generate, the system will help us to generate reports so that we can continue our reporting aspect, because it's good to have a system, but if the system doesn't report and doesn't evaluate how the project is going, it's not a good system. So that is what we are working on. The system should have been completed, but what we are doing, there's a financial module that we wanted to link with the current government payment system. Government has a payment system that they have acquired a couple years ago, and we don't want to avoid duplication of stakeholders having to input information on our system and finance system. We wanted to integrate it. We want that both systems be able to speak to each other. So once they input information of payments, we at finance collect information, and we economic development also give us information. So that is where we're working on. We hope that it's a good system, and we do hope that we will be able to start to generate project with this system in a short run. With regards to insights on the way forward of COVID recovery, I believe it's no difference to what Ghana has reported. It caught us by surprise. Our fiscal year starts April 1st to March 31st. So April came, the pandemic was right there. A budget was presented the month before. It was presented in the House of Representatives in March and debated, approved, not. But currently the Ministry of Finance is revising because we cannot, finance cannot continue with that budget. Revenues have reduced drastically. In fact, projected GDP has declined by -15%, and the fiscal deficit is now at the level of 8% of GDP. So we can see that it's really affected. Although, thanks God, the number of cases is, in fact, Belize is one of the few countries in Latin America and Caribbean that have been able to contain the spread of HIV, the spread of this coronavirus. At the moment, Belize has reported 33 cases with 2 deaths. It's not bad. I know we could have done better, but the government has taken many restrictions, state of emergency that includes nighttime curfew. School have been closed, businesses have been closed. We are starting to open. The airport has been closed since March, and the airport is expected to reopen in a control basis on.
Sorry to interrupt. You have to wind up now. Please wrap up. Thank you.
Pardon? Yes, okay. So what we have done, not much similar, we have also been able to reprogram some projects, IDB, World Bank, OPEC Fund for International Development, and we are also negotiating for new projects. We have been successful with some, and we are still negotiating with others. I hope this has been very helpful, and I am available to ask any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. Actually, it's very illuminating what you just presented. Even in the absence of a policy, you have done so much.
Yes.
If you have the NDCP policy, the performance will go even higher. And I just want, we were caught by surprise. The world was caught by surprise with this pandemic. But risk management should be now front and center of all policies. We do not know what kind of risks are coming our way. So a good policy with risk management tools will enable countries to deal with such, I hope this doesn't happen again, deal with such challenges in a far more effective manner. But I agree with you, let's work together. How can we help you develop the NDCP? So while my colleagues are trying to get Mr. Razaul Bashar back, we will go ahead and move to the lead discussants. But before going there, I'll be checking the Q&A column. I don't see many questions. Go ahead and you can type your questions and my colleagues will compile those. Feel free to do it while the discussion is going on. Our first lead discussant is Member of Parliament and Chair of the Subcommittee for Development Cooperation in Austria. And Petra has been a standing supporter of the DCF. Petra, these 2 questions for you. What are the greatest opportunities for parliamentarians to enhance their contributions to the enablers of more effective development cooperation? And you saw Angela's results. You are using, parliamentarians are using the information systems far more than other stakeholders, but your role in the development of policies is not as active as we want it to be. And also tell us, how is capacity development among parliamentarians playing a role? Because parliamentarians need knowledge, information to make effective contributions in policy development and monitoring, even in the forums. Petra, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Navid, and a very good afternoon from Vienna. First, I want to mention that I think that COVID-19 had a kind of function like a magnifying glass. All those inequalities, all these discriminations that have been there for many years became much more visible, much more obvious. And so I think that helped to strengthen our side on that. But it also worked in some content to like a wake-up call that development, especially in the field of health, is much more than just sending medicine. It is sharing property rights of a vaccine as soon as it is found that everybody really has access to this medicine. And it is much more than sending nurses. It should be to provide education for medical personnel, to support universities, maybe to build up cooperation between different universities in the north and the south to strengthen education. And it is much more than sending equipment. It is really to help to build up universal health coverage and build resilient infrastructure in health that makes it possible to take self-determinated and fitting solutions. That would be a real good basis for development cooperation, I would say. And when it comes to the role of members of parliament, I think first and foremost, it's also up to us to raise awareness that we either will fight the virus globally or we will not defeat it at all. We will not overcome the crisis at all because we saw how interconnected everybody is with everybody else. Second, of course, it's up to MPs to provide budgets for a cooperation on eye level. And third, I would say that we also should be or act as role models and really live international solidarity and not just talk about it, but really do it also in the decisions we are taking. And that's not just in development cooperation, it's in the field of industry, environment, education, and whatever you can think about. So to have a real holistic approach to development cooperation. What I also think is important that the guidance for all our policies, and I mean both the domestic and also the development cooperation, is that we really should provide public services, including education, water supply, public housing, waste management, and of course also healthcare, and maintain these public services on a very high quality level. Because I think it's important not to privatize those, but guarantee access to a high quality public service for everybody. But because just if you own it as public body, then you can take decisions, then you can quickly find some transformation that are necessary to respond to a pandemic like COVID-19, for instance, was. So we also always have to have in mind the benefit of the many and not the profit of the few. And to conclude, I really want to say that I'm totally happy that obviously parliamentarians and parliaments meanwhile are a matter of course of service and considerations. That was not always the case. And I'm happy. I see that as a progress and as a success of the work of parliamentarians to raise their voices and say, hey, we are actors as well. We are important. Consider our opinion, consider our possibilities. So I'm really happy that we are not no aliens anymore, but part of the game. And I think you will find a lot of MPs who really would like to contribute and try to change things to a better globally, not only in their countries. Thank you very much.
Petra, thank you for giving us such a big picture. I'm so grateful the way you have framed the question. And I don't think parliamentarians are just being part of the game. You are shaping the rules of the game. You are the lawmakers, you are the legislatures. And you're right, it's not just giving medicines, it's giving access to medicines and intellectual property rights. You're absolutely right on the mark. And you have been the voice of conscience for the DCF. So I'm glad you're maintaining that profile. Our panelists from Bangladesh, Mr. Riazul Bashar has been able to join back. So before I go to the next lead discussion, let me first invite him to share his thoughts with us. Mr. Riazul Bashar, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Now, am I clear to you? Am I audible to you?
Loud and clear. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It's a pleasure for me to be able to join you today. I would like to express my sincere thanks and appreciation to UNDESA for inviting Bangladesh at this virtual August gathering to share our experience and learn substantive insights from others. Bangladesh, since 2008, Bangladesh has been participating in this DCF survey, and we strongly believe that DCF survey promotes effective dialogue on development cooperation, mutual learning among stakeholders, and improved coordination within and beyond the government. Today, I would like to touch upon 3 enablers and also on the COVID-19. As you know that we have prepared a draft national policy on development cooperation to ensure that foreign assistance follow national development priorities as determined by the national development plans. And we admit that it has been a while since the final draft policy is pending for approval. However, a thorough analysis and discussion on such rather sensitive policy is inevitable. In the meantime, Bangladesh economy has been going through a mass transformation. It has registered a steady progress in almost all macroeconomic indicators during the pre-COVID period. But the recent outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, it has posed a serious challenge to our economy. And keeping those in mind, the policy might need further revision before it gets the approval. And we should mention here that though we don't have any policy in a single document, but we follow some guidelines and strategies, which are dispersed in several documents. Like the 7th have highlighted the development cooperation issue and its role in achieving countries' desired development results, and recently adopted the 8th five-year plan and SDG have already incorporated the development issues and identified its importance in fulfilling the SDG commitments and other national development goals. Now come to the point of country result framework. Bangladesh for the first time introduced this country result framework in our 6th five-year plan to monitor the development results. And after that, we also introduced a robust and very comprehensive development result framework in our plan. The 28th monitoring round of GPEDC, Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, reveals that in Bangladesh, the use of country results framework and planning tools by the DPs has increased to a large extent, that is 76% as compared to 66% in 2016. And the study also found that 71% of results indicators of new projects and programs were drawn from country-owned results framework. It is a challenge in setting targets for the DRF, as because the main challenge is in addressing all the issues and targets of all the development actors, where there are considerable difference in priorities. And there is another challenge, that is the availability of timely, reliable, and comprehensive data against the targets of indicated development results framework. And we are now going to adopt the 8th five-year plan soon, and we hope we'll be able to address those challenges by introducing a more refined development results framework. Bangladesh Development Forum is the highest biennial multi-stakeholder dialogue platform, and it reviews the implementation progress, discuss countries' strategic development priorities, reform requirements, and also resource and policy gaps in attaining the SDG. Our Honorable Prime Minister graced all the BDFs as the chief guest, while the respective honorable ministers, they chaired the business sessions. So representation of the government at senior level has served as an incentive for the other stakeholders to participate in delegation. So this is an incentive for them. And there is another coordination mechanism which we call the local consultative group. It supports development coordination under the National Development Plan. It focuses on results and promotes principles of effective development cooperation. Working groups at various sectors also informs the discussion of the LCG to strengthen coordination and to avoid duplication and overlapping. Our draft 8 policy positions the development forums as inclusive forum for all stakeholders, including the CSO and private sector. Government is persistently trying to reach all the relevant development actors to participate in the discussion. The COVID-19 pandemic hit globally, including Bangladesh in late March 2020. The government took necessary measures to save lives and livelihood. Massive fiscal and monetary support amounting to around 4% of our total GDP are extended to confront the unprecedented challenge and maintain the vibrancy of the economy. Bangladesh expects to register the highest growth rate of 8.2% in the recent history in the financial year 2021, I mean the next year, bouncing back from the lowest rate of 5.2% in this year, I mean 2020, which was choked by the COVID-19. At this stage, it is difficult for Bangladesh to precisely estimate the economic damage caused by the COVID-19. However, we are closely monitoring the dynamics of the pandemic and remain vigilant to grasp the potential challenges to our development trajectory. Development cooperation landscape will evolve during and after COVID-19 pandemic, and for Bangladesh, it will face new challenge in trade and mobilizing concessional development assistance after LDC graduation. As you have already mentioned that Bangladesh is going to graduate by the year 2024 after getting the second recommendation by the UNCDP in the year 2021. And considering this changing pattern, the government is undertaking different specific capacity building programs. At this moment, effective development cooperation matters more than ever before. And to create resilient societies and deliver long-lasting results contributing to the achievement of the SDG, our actions must be guided by the principles of effective development cooperation. And we recognize that the socio-economic effects of COVID-19 will undoubtedly impede the journey to 2030 agenda. There is a need for more collective action to keep the momentum of the decade of action to achieve the SDG. We hope that the global community will deliver on the commitment made and become more proactive on the shared responsibilities. We believe that full compliance of SDG framework, which is built on inclusiveness, solidarity, and partnership, will help us to build back better. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Azal Bashir. And I think you have really presented a very strong case the way Bangladesh is implementing the policy, and also, but I also tend to share your very astute observation. Data remains a challenge. Getting the correct numbers, getting the analysis on data is a big challenge in development cooperation, and it requires improvement from all sides. Now let me move on to our second lead discussant, Luca Di Fraia. He has again been engaged with the DCF from the very beginning. Luca, I have just two questions for you. What are the greatest challenges to improving the contribution of non-state stakeholders to more effective development cooperation, and especially after the COVID-19? And how can we bridge the gap between coverage of non-state actors in NDCPs and DACIS, which Angela mentioned, and their meaningful engagement in practice? So both in developing policies and then in implementing it. Luca, over to you.
Very many thanks, Naveed and colleagues and very many thanks for.
Luca, could you speak a bit louder? We can't hear you.
What about now? Is it
better? Thank you
so much. And I was just thanking you all for this conversation. I noted down that when it comes to CSOs, it's very easy to say that we play multiple roles at the very same time. So, and I noted down that especially now in this COVID-19 situation. For instance, we play a quite critical role in mobilizing the public opinion. And this is both happening, let's say, in the north and the south, speak easily. In the north, for instance, we are campaigning for traditional donors to improve their support through development cooperation and aid specifically, because we know that additional resources are really needed to make sure that COVID-19 is not disrupting previous challenges, efforts to address previous challenges. The other role that we play is definitely the traditional role of implementing activities. And this is happening. We didn't stop throughout COVID-19 crisis. And I think it's fair to say that this has been possible mostly thanks to partners. Working with partners has been crucial. Is possibly the most resilient modality that we can put in practice, in place, because working with communities, local NGOs and CSOs that know very familiar with the reality is as the most practical and resilient way to go ahead. And then we have the third role, which is the role of the watchdogs that we play when it comes to policies and policy setting. And we have been playing this role also throughout this COVID-19 period. I refer to the issue of additional resources, but I can also refer to the issue of tracking resources going into COVID-19. This is a very big issue from the watchdog perspective, because there's so many announcements and we would like to know the reality of these announcements. When it comes to how to increase the role of CSOs, I noted down that we have issues related to the restrictions that have been implemented throughout the lockdown. Obviously, it was important to implement certain social distancing. In some cases, this policy restricting the very well.
Your voice is breaking. Voice is breaking. Thank you.
The camera is off now. Possibly the line is better.
It's better. Okay. You have better bandwidth now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just referring to the issue of restrictions introduced because of the lockdown. Sometimes these may actually turn into additional shrinking space in many ways. And when it comes to national development cooperation policies and forums, I really honestly appreciate the findings from the study, and I would easily align with the call for better national cooperation policies and forums, because those are vital for CSOs and non-executive stakeholders. Obviously, we know that these elements, these institutions are led by the governments, but I think one way that non-executive actors can improve their role in these two instances is actually working with other actors such as the parliaments. We have a strong record of working together with parliaments, and because we have the shared interest in getting access to information and shared interest in getting involved in shaping policies. And the findings from the study, as I was just trying to say, are very useful in that regard. Let me also notice that this emphasis on National Development Cooperation Forum and also the focus on information systems, very interesting element that talk about bringing this agenda to the local level. And this is the essence of the effectiveness agenda that has been discussed over the past 10 years. So I would say that CSOs will definitely benefit from that kind of approach and will support that kind of approach. Thanks.
Thank you, Luca. So let's move to the interactive part of our discussion. We have almost 15 minutes and we have received some very interesting questions. Let me read those and then I will go back to the panelists. And of course, you can also invite Angela to respond. I think first question, which is more for Belize, and this is our colleague Alessandro Mota from the IPU. What keeps a country for developing a standalone national development cooperation policy. If it has been demonstrated, then it's likely to be more specific and actionable. The second question comes from Udo from Germany. I agree with the need to strengthen partner countries' capacities for results-based approaches. Would the development community also need a discussion on the recommended quality standards for country results frameworks? Very interesting. On stakeholder participation, Amy from IBON is asking, thank you to the DCF for this survey. The study reveals a lack of decision-making roles and targets given to unions and CSOs and NDCPs. How can working people's substantive participation be enabled for democratic ownership, such as in the crafting of INFFs? For example, how can we address the huge gaps in ample gender disaggregated data, which would be an obstacle to crafting national plans on INFFs? I think these are pretty broad range of questions. Let me begin with first asking now our ASG, Elliot Harris, who has been also a very ardent supporter of the DCF's work. He is saying the survey notes that NDCPs cover the wider range of development actors. Policies still focus on public sector actors. Does that imply that development is still seen by governments as something to be done by governments? Very insightful question. So we have 4 sets of questions. I think I want to invite Carlos first on the NDCP and of course Angela. And then I want to invite Luca on CSOs, what can be done. And of course, Udo's question, I would invite Angela to respond. And ASG's question applies to all of you. Carlos, could we begin with you on NDCPs, and then Angela can complement your observations. What is really stopping from a country to developing NDCP when it knows it's of high value? It really helps in getting better results. Carlos?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we have been using our strategies. We don't have a set policy. To me, it has to do with one political will, having parliamentarians at the highest level to be able to understand the benefits of having a set policy. I think political will is something that we need to work on. And the other thing is the status quo. Belize is only 38 years. We received independence in 1981. So, and we have not had a long-term development framework until we prepared it in 2010. Before that, it was planned by political terms. Every 5 years, we used to have a strategy, and after 5 years, a new government comes, new strategy. But in 2010, the country, with both political, the most political parties, meaning the government and the opposition, which have been in power since 1981 up to now, is just 2 parties that have dominated the political in the country. They sat together and we prepared this long-term development framework, and out of that, the medium term comes for us to achieve the set goals on the long term. So 2 things, political will and the status quo that we have inherited. To me, that would be my answer.
Thank you, Carlos. Very concise answer. We will invite Angela towards the end. Let me go to Mr. Riazul Bashar. Udo's question, quality standards for country results frameworks, and other panelists can also come in, but Riazul Bashar, would we hear your views? Would the development community also need a discussion on the recommended quality standards for country results frameworks?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Navid. regarding Udo's question, the quality standard of the development result framework, it needs a very deep consultation with the development partners and also the other stakeholders like CSO and private sectors. And for improving the quality of the development results framework, definitely their views must be entertained and accommodated while you prepare this development result framework. And the first thing is that there should be a demand for this development result framework, both from the development partner side and also from the government side. I mean, if they don't use it, if they don't use it for the budget preparation, for the planning, for the development, for the planning purpose, then whether you have a development result framework or not, it does not it does not give you any sort of implications. So therefore, it should be utilized. It should be used by the stakeholders. Otherwise, it will never be able to improve itself over the time. Regarding the NDCP, National Development Cooperation Policy, can I make a very short comment?
Sure, sure.
I was hearing the Carlos comment on the National Development Cooperation Policy, and he has rightly mentioned that there should be a strong political will, and we would like to maintain the status quo, that we don't want to go beyond that status quo. That is, his points are very, very right. But from my point of view, whenever you have some national development cooperation policies, then there will be some what should be done and what should not be done. This kind of things should be there. And the stakeholders, they don't want to follow those guidelines. Some of them, they don't want to follow those guidelines. Or in other ways, they don't want to confine or bind them within this framework of the National Development Cooperation Policy. So that's why sometimes the stakeholders, they don't want to have the national policy in place. So it is better that, or it is imperative that all the stakeholders, they should have the appetite for having a national development cooperation policy. Otherwise, it is very difficult to get it. Thank you, Mr. Nabi.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Gladys, your thoughts, and if you could also address the question by ASG Harris. Is development a government-to-government activity, or with the other partners also coming in? And Ghana is also very forward-looking in rethinking development. Your finance minister is a very dynamic person. So Gladys, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Navid. Very interesting questions. And yes, governments are to lead development. And there is, so even though development cannot be undertaken by just one actor, it is the responsibility of every government to champion development, because development, we all know, cannot come on a silver platter. It has to be actually planned and executed. And the governments have social contracts with their populace. That is the reason why they go campaign that vote for me. If you vote for me, I'm going to help you develop. If you vote for me, I'm going to change your position. I'm going to change your status. I'm going to add value to you. So yes, everybody has a right and the responsibility to help, but it is the agenda of government to lead any developmental agenda. And that cannot be, that role cannot be relegated to the background, and it cannot be shifted to anybody. And that is why when things are going bad in economies, we blame the government, even though all of us have roles to play. It is your responsibility to make sure that it works and people get better off. That is number one. The issue of capacity issues. I must say that I started my intervention by saying that the mere size of the pandemic, the mere size of it has serious ramifications that is over and above us, everybody. And so even though you might have adequate capacity in place, I don't think anybody has set aside that amount of money and resources to fight a pandemic of this nature. And that is why it is looking as if capacity was not there, capacity was not planned for it. It is just the size of it. and it calls for collaboration at the highest level. It calls for sacrifices. It calls for rescaling of everything. So the capacity is there, but I don't think it is at that level for people to be able to counteract a pandemic of this nature. Thank you very much.
So Gladys, I want to now begin with you with Amy's question. And that is about democratic ownership of the integrated national financing frameworks. Overall, civil society's lack of its role in decision making and its really ability to influence NDCPs in an effective way. Would you like to share your thoughts with us, Gladys?
Yes, thank you very much. Now, the international, the INFS, you know, Ghana is part of the preparatory countries, the pilot countries.
Yeah.
It is a new model. Even though we have signed on it, we are now sitting down to really see how it can fit into our own, especially our own the financing architecture, especially from the grassroots. We want this to be demanded at the district and the municipal levels, and then we work up with it. So luckily, the UNDP has already signed on with government, Ministry of Finance leading the process for us to go to the district level to find out the various aspects of this integrated financial framework and how together we'll be able to bring them up. And then we work from the grassroots and move them up. So yes, there are discussions going on it, but nothing concrete has really been put on paper. And I'm sure when we crystallize on that, we'll be able to share our findings.
Thank you. You are a pioneer country. Actually, two modules of the INFF are about monitoring and review and governance and transparency. So that's where I think CSOs and non-state actors should have a very visible role.
Yes, and we are working with the CSOs in Ghana.
Yeah. Okay. Let me go to Petra. Petra, ASC Harris' question. What he's talking about is, well, government will raise the rules, government will have the vision, government will put the policies in place, but government doesn't have to do everything. What are your views on that? Development is larger than what governments can do, but governments remain primary actors. They have the central role, as Gladys is saying. Petra.
Yes, of course. I also think that it's not government's self to have to do everything. That's right. There are other actors who can do that better. I saw a question on that in the Q&A saying why the public sector should have the majority. I was mistaken. I do not speak about the majority. I speak about the ownership, the total ownership when it comes to public services. And I can explain it on the one hand on health once more. A state, a government, a city, a parliament, whoever, has a focus on the benefit and health of the citizens and on the profit of one enterprise. And also in Austria, for instance, where we have a very good public healthcare system, we as a parliament got a lot of criticism that there are too many beds, hospital beds in intensive care units. And then when the COVID pandemic broke out, everybody was totally happy to have a lot of beds in intensive care units. And even the Court of Audit, who criticized us before, took the criticism back and said, okay, maybe better to have beds just in case and keep that, please maintain that. And a state can do that, a city can do that. It depends on who it belongs to. But however, I think there are so many examples for drinking water, for fresh water privatization, where after privatization, and it's not said that a private entity maybe also manages drinking water supply well. That's possible, but it's not a question of managing. It's the question of decisions. It's the question of ownership. And as long as drinking water supply chains belong to the public sector, of course, every country, every city focus on high quality, will focus that everybody has access because they care of a good
That's right.
company
You
to
it so eloquently. Public sector has to focus on public goods. When profit is the motivation, you are not sure of quality, access,
for everybody, and access for everybody, and a good quality, right? Yeah.
Very, very, very well framed. So we are not saying government should be doing everything, but government has a responsibility for providing public.
And it should take the strategic. That's the question.
For the larger public good. Would agree more with you. Luca, you have 1 minute to share your thoughts before I go to Angela, because I have a very good question for her from Narayan. Luca.
Okay, very quickly. One is just to make it clear that CSOs are not in this discussion to look for a seat at the table. So that's not our concern. Our general concern is to make sure that there is accountability when it comes to decisions by governments and, for instance, also development cooperation partners. So accountability is paramount. And if I have to submit a suggestion about how to improve the role of CSOs in key national development cooperation policies, I think we should be starting from the other enablers, the development cooperation forums. And I think we should be joining forces with other development actors to make sure that these forums are actually working. If we need to have a conversation, we need the space for that conversation. Otherwise, there's no way to have it. Thanks.
Thank you, Luca. So platforms should exist for your effective and visible participation. Angela, I'm coming to you for the last concluding thoughts, but I have a very good question from Narayan. How does the survey see the future landscape of development cooperation in terms of priority and availability in light of prolonging crises of COVID-19? So how do we take into account such crises, and especially what we have at hand right now if the pandemic persists or goes over for some time? Angela, share your thoughts on this question and any other points that were raised during the conversation. Over to you, Angela.
The sound.
Yeah, we can hear you now. Please go ahead, Angela.
No, sorry, what I'm saying is I couldn't hear all of the question.
Let me read out the last question for you. How does the survey see the future landscape of development cooperation in terms of priority and availability in light of prolonging crisis of COVID-19?
Oh, that's a very difficult question.
That's why I left it for you.
Yeah, very difficult question. Well, you know what I see that COVID-19 has brought up a couple of things for me. The first being the highlighting of the inequalities, and one of the things we really need to be focusing on in future survey is how development cooperation is in fact really being used to address the deep inequalities that we've seen. So that's the one aspect. Also, the COVID-19, the issue of partnerships, whole of society approaches, and I see again that the enablers are going to be very important in building that. We talk about whole of society and multi-stakeholder approaches and the National Development Cooperation Forums. But in practice, it has really been about government and international development cooperation partners. So I see going forward, there has to be a serious attempt at getting all the other players on board and providing that space to have the dialogues that are necessary to build what we could talk about long-term resilience. The other aspect is also to get back to, there was an earlier question around national development cooperation policies. Are they necessary? Yes, they are, but only to the extent that they are actually implemented, and that goes for results frameworks as well. So I see going forward, how do the developed countries or partners support, continue building the capacity of developing countries to drive the building of resilience going forward. So I don't have a simple, straight answer for that question, other than to say that from what I see, development cooperation is going to continue to play a very critical role, and the monitoring of commitments is going to be very important. I've picked up concerns. Will countries be able to maintain the level of commitments they've had in the past, because they themselves have been impacted negatively by COVID-19. But then just finally, while recognizing the role that governments play, what I've seen in COVID-19, at least in the country that I'm sitting in South Africa, is that we often forget about the agency that people have around their own development. And perhaps that's something that we should be looking at in future DCF surveys. The citizens always seem to come up last in our discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. And I think what we also need to look at the survey by redesigning it to some extent. What are the big barriers countries are facing in developing NDCPs? How can they overcome those standalone NDCPs? And I must say, on the National Development Cooperation Forums, we really need to push harder. Those platforms should be available to all stakeholders, be the private sector, the CSOs, the experts. So we can design the survey to look at the challenges of issues like COVID-19, the risks, economic and non-economic. That's what we need to focus on in our survey, what those risks can mean for development cooperation. I don't have time to summarize such a rich discussion, but we will make the recording available. We will also prepare a summary. I want to thank each and every panelist and the lead discussants for their time, for their engagement, and for their very insightful comments and sharing of experiences. We truly appreciate. I want to thank the government of Switzerland, whose generosity supported the production of the DCF Survey Study. I also want to thank the government of Norway, who has been supporting our work in many areas. The points that you have raised are vital, but I just want to let you know this event is just first in a series of DCF webinars that FSDO and partners will organize in 2020 to advance understanding on risk-informed and climate-smart development cooperation. Because I say climate has always been the big elephant in the room. We cannot ignore it. And the pandemic has shown us the risks that can surface at any moment. And we have to deal with them while we're dealing with climate change. It looms large, and we need to be ready to develop all policies with clear measures to address climate change. Mitigation, adaptation, all ways. Now, each step that you will identify will sharpen our understanding and eventually lead us to 6 to 7 May 2021. That is the new date for the high-level meeting of the DCF, which we had to defer from this past May because of the pandemic. But we were happy to have you through the virtual webinar, and even though it did curtail our ability to interact with you, but you shared a lot of good ideas with us from all parts of the world and offer different perspectives. So we invite all of you to engage, including through reaching out and connecting with the questions and ideas on how the DCF can support your efforts during this time. I want to thank all of you again for your participation. I want to thank the attendees for their engagement. I want to thank for the questions that were posed for this conversation. And above all, I also want to thank the DCF team led by Ms. Caroline Lombardo and of course, Angela Bester for the analysis that she presented. And if you were with me physically, I would request a round of applause for the DCF team, but you can still send your comments and compliments to all of them. Thank you so much. Stay well, stay safe. All the best to you and to your family. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much from Belize.
Thank you.
Much from Accra.
Stay well, stay safe.
Diana.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye, Angela. Bye, Petra. Bye, Gladys.
Bye.
Carlos, Razul Bashir, all. Luca. Bye-bye.